Hi, Gina. Thank
Hi,
you. Thank you so much for being with the IGU today. We are super excited to discuss your making of the film Kivalina, as well as your experiences with the Kivalina community and the climate change related challenges that they are facing. So before we get into the interview, we just wanted to provide our viewers with a little introduction about you. So Gina Abatemarco is a writer and director based in Brooklyn, New York. Her films have played around the world at festivals including IDFA, Sheffield Doc Fest, Full Frame, the Royal Anthropological Institute, and the American Film Festival in Wroclaw. Her debut feature documentary, Kivalina, chronicles the ongoing story of an Inupiaq Eskimo tribe whose island is disappearing into the Alaskan Arctic. In 2016, Kivalina was broadcast on the Emmy Award-winning show America Reframed, and our work has been supported by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the Tribeca Film Institute, the IFP Film Labs, and Vision Maker Media. So again, we are so appreciative to have you here with us today. And now to start off our questions, we wanted to begin by asking, how did you first hear of Kivalina and what inspired you to make a film there?
Well, I first became aware of the island of Kivalina in November 2007, and I had graduated college and I had worked a job that allowed me to save some money in the film industry, and I took that money and I went on a gap year. It was about a year and a half, and I traveled through Europe and I traveled in India, and it was an extraordinary time of my life. I'm a child of the 80s, so I grew up with National Geographics. I did not grow up with the consciousness of climate change, as many young people do today. So I had gone out to see the world. It was a real privilege. It was not something that previous generations in my family had been able to do and to travel like that. So I felt incredibly privileged, incredibly blessed, and I really fell in love with the world. Um, the natural world. And it was such an extraordinary experience that I couldn't help but think that would be something I would love to pass on if I had children. I would love to allow a daughter or a son to go and see the world as a young person. And but soon after I got home, and I had been again living in Europe and in Asia, it was 2007, and sort of climate change consciousness had moved into the mainstream. And so this is after An Inconvenient Truth. And it was a really sensational time because there was suddenly this public acknowledgement that we had a real problem. And it was incredibly devastating. Um, it was after falling in love with the natural world to really start to understand um, how dangerous things had become for this beautiful planet. Just really kind of broke my heart. And I was sort of living in that emotion and re-immersing back into my life in the United States. And I opened the newspaper. My family's from California, and I read this article about Kivalina. And it was an incredibly sensational article because it's about a little island, um, 120 miles above the Arctic Circle, built on silt, sand, and permafrost. And the island, the permafrost is melting, and the island is disintegrating into the Chukchi Sea. And there's storms, and it's dangerous. So it was incredibly sensational and a confirmation um, that climate change was happening. And of course, at that time, the people of Kivalina were not being really heard or listened to. Um, but there was another part of the article that touched me very, very deeply, and that was the part about the parents in Kivalina not knowing if they could pass on their cultural heritage to the next generation, and that was causing um, an anxiety and a discomfort emotionally for people. And in some ways, that matched this discomfort that had begun to rise in me, and I felt drawn. My heart felt drawn to that experience. So a lot of documentary filmmakers, not only me, talk about how their films choose them. I would say that this working in Kivalina was an extraordinary opportunity. And in some ways, this project may have chosen me. It was not something I was looking for at the time, but felt so emotionally compelled by the story of these parents that I put it out to the universe at large, and opportunities came for me to start working there. I'll just mention the first opportunity to work in Kivalina came from the Berlin Film Festival. It was 20 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and a program through the Berlinale offered me an opportunity to make a short film about a seawall in Kivalina. They were producing films about walls in celebration of that moment in their history. So that is how I came to know Kivalina.
Give us a bit more insight into your personal perspective while filming Kivalina. What was your process as a filmmaker like, and how long did it take you to make the film?
Thank you for that question. So making Kivalina was a labor of love. The film took 7 years to make, and I believe that the time that it took to make, which was very difficult while living through it, because filmmakers often really live through their films, and when you're making a film, it's such a big part of your life. So it was difficult that it took so long. Um, but I think the amount of time that it took to make this film is what is special about this film. We shot over 350 hours of footage, and out of those 350 hours, approximately, we distilled down essentially 65 minutes from all of those hours to make the film that you will watch at the conference. And I think it was critical that I had an awakening as a filmmaker, and my partner in crime on the project, my cinematographer, Zoe White, as well. Um, we were working in a very, very small crew, and we had to shoot many, 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 many things to start to understand really what was happening in Kivalina under the surface for ourselves as people. And so I think the time that it took really served the project. I came into the project wanting to make a political documentary. I came into the project wanting to have some kind of resolution at the end of the film, which was a very naive way to enter a situation like this. But I was very young when I started the film, and I just assumed that by the end of the filming that the community would be relocated. It seemed to me as a young filmmaker, as a first-time filmmaker, that it was a complete no-brainer that this beautiful community with such an important heritage would be protected and respected by their government and my government, the American government. And so that was an incredibly naive perspective. And so having it take so long to make the film allowed us to live through and experience some of the discomfort that the people in Kivalina themselves were experiencing in terms of wanting to relocate, wanting to have better services on the island, being able to live a better life. And so we did follow a political story almost in vain because there were no results in many ways as we made the film, but we would shoot the film and we would come to Kivalina for long periods of time. And in the periods of rest, when we weren't pursuing this political story, I think we had an opportunity to, the community really opened up. And so in a very simple way, I would say that we were able to make a film that has this type of intimacy because we worked on it for so long, which means that behind these images, there are friendships. It means that behind these images, there are filmmakers that are having a truly, truly emotional experience while making this film. And people and the community opened up to us as filmmakers over time. So I think in some ways, the most important footage was shot at the end of the 7 years because we had established relationships, specifically with two really beautiful families. And that gave us the privilege of being in people's homes and being in people's homes for long periods of time where we could just be a fly on the wall. Zoe and I were both really committed to shooting this film in the style of cinema verite, which is essentially being a fly on the wall. Um, and that access takes time, and it's one of the most extraordinary experiences, to have people let you into their lives, and it's a huge privilege. And I think because it took so long, we had the opportunity to understand that the subsistence food traditions of Kivalina were the most essential to capture, and that these traditions were truly at risk, and that they were something that we wanted to bring to the forefront, and really give the viewer an opportunity to experience, um, the really beautiful culture um, of Kivalina. So um, I'm really into food. I love the slow food movement. In some ways, this was a kind of slow filmmaking, and it was just an extraordinary experience for us.
So this builds a bit off of what you just were saying in your last response, but your filmmaking was obviously such a substantive and immersive process. So when you think back on it today, what stories or just what general memory hits you the most?
Well, every time I think of Kivalina, there's something really incredible about the community. And you go to Kivalina for the first time, and that's your first visit. But every time you come back to Kivalina, and you fly to Anchorage, then you fly to Kotzebue, then you take a very small plane that lands sort of on the tail end of the island. And when you arrive, hopefully someone's picking you up, because you've got a lot of film equipment with you. Um, but as soon as you get there and you start driving into town, or you arrive in the airport, everyone in town says to you, "Welcome home." And it's just the most extraordinary thing. And Kivalina is just such an extraordinary place. And um, I hope that the sort of beauty and the warmth of the community really comes through in the filmmaking. I think that it does. But when I look back, and I think about this film, I think that the film came out in 2016, but I think the film is so relevant today, and maybe it's growing in relevance because um, I think what was captured in this film um, was very unique. When we shot it, and when we shot it, a lot of the elders that had grown up in a traditional subsistence lifestyle and had really seen the Arctic change over time. A lot of those elders are in the film. A lot of those elders are people that we spent time with, and so that's and some of the elders are no longer with us. So it's really I'm just so happy that they are in the film, and um, you know it just I think it's the film still today is an important expression of climate injustice in this country. Um, I think this film shows how the United States um, still does not really value and cherish its First Nations people, um, and um, and also its citizens. So I think the film is a record of climate injustice. But I also see it as a celebration of the resilience of Indigenous people and Indigenous people in the Arctic, and specifically, the resilience and the warmth of the people in Kivalina. Um, I think for people who work in policy, sometimes you can forget that there's human beings on the other side. of an issue. And I hope that this film really illustrates the beautiful humanity that is in this place. Um, that's my hope.
Um, yeah, I agree with you. It definitely feels like a timeless documentary. Like it just applies like no matter when you look at it, like through a historical perspective. So the next question that we have for you is how did you experience the effects of climate change while making the film?
Yeah. So suddenly the first thing that is coming to mind is that my cinematographer Zoe and I, our last shooting trip to Kivalina was in the late fall, and this was a period of time that we had heard discussed many, many times. The late fall is the period of storms in the Arctic, and traditionally there would be sea ice along the coast, and the sea ice would keep the waves back. But because of climate change, there is no more sea ice in the late fall. So the first thing that is coming to mind is that we experienced the fear that the people in Kivalina live through year by year during this particular season. Um, because there were some incredible, incredible storms and the water was incredibly close. So that was important for us to experience. Um, you know, we experienced climate change in the community because we were really dedicated to shooting um, the subsistence traditions and the migration pattern of the animals, um, the ice. Um, it was constantly changing. It was very difficult to know when to get on a plane if you wanted to shoot seal hunting, which is, seal is incredibly important to the community. It was hard to know because things were in flux. The weather was always in flux. And because we worked with the hunters and had spoken to the elders, um, people were concerned and confused, not really confused, but concerned and watching this massive change happen to animal migration and patterns that people had been depending on for generations. Um, so watching the hunting change was huge. Watching the storms. Um, you know, Climate change also has a huge emotional and psychological effect. Um, Living through the storms is obviously creating a huge amount of anxiety. The reason that the storms are so dangerous in Kivalina is because when there are storms, you can't get a boat in to get people out. You can't fly a plane in to get people out. Um, and people were afraid of that. Um, Also, because the community was in this standstill, there was another emotional effect in the sense that the community could not really plan ahead. They didn't know when they would be relocating. They didn't know. Um, there's a lot of things that they didn't know. And the community was growing, um, and there isn't enough housing. So many people are sharing space. Too many people are sharing space. And young families wanted their own spaces, and it's very difficult. Um, and, you know, so the culture was affected, people's psychology was affected. Um, and also people's health was affected when people aren't able to enact their hunting traditions and bring in food to store during the summer and fall for the winter. They have to depend on industrial food, which is incredibly unhealthy. So there's an effect on health as well. The island is also overcrowded, and there's a big waste management issue. The people of Kivalina have been wanting to relocate for a very, very long time, for generations. And one of the reasons is that they would like basic services like running water. They currently don't have running water. And there's a dump site at the end of town that is not sufficient in its size. And there are complications with that are also causing health problems. So, and not to mention the community is a whaling community. And because the ice is changing every year, whaling is changing every year. And this is a really big deal for the community.
Yeah, I can only begin to imagine the uncertainty that the people face in the village. And then the last question that we have for you is, how do you see your work looking back?
Looking back on the film, I guess I would circle back to what I had mentioned before, which is that I think that this film is a important cultural portrait. I think the film is an important portrait of climate injustice. I think the film is also a celebration of an extraordinary place that really should be honored and should be protected. And I would like more people to see the film. I hope the film can continue to have an effect today.
Thank you. I just actually want to ask you one more question before we let you go, because I think that this will be very useful. Since the project's conclusion, because I know you said you've wrapped in 2016, have you kept in contact with the Kivalina community? And if so, what has your relationship been like? And if you know any updates kind of regarding the status of the community?
Yeah, I spoke to someone from the community just a couple nights ago, and there are updates. The island has, on one side is the ocean and on the other side is the lagoon, and the community has recently completed a evacuation road over the lagoon, and that's really exciting because that means that they can build the new school, and this means that they could relocate because now they have a way to get off the island. It's also actually an evacuation road if the community needs to leave.